Welcome, everyone, to Latter Daily Digest. Latter Daily Digest aims to promote creators, and a big creator in Mormon land is Steve Pynakker, and he's done a lot of work with interfaith efforts and other things. And welcome to the show, Steve, from Mormon Book Reviews.
Oh, thanks, Jane. Thanks for having me on. Over the course of the last, now I'd say 72 hours, because it was Tuesday, right? Yeah, Tuesday afternoon, early afternoon. Got word that one of the biggest news stories was about to, basically, John Hajicek came on my program, the very first program he came on. So some people are saying that others, no, it's not. John Hajicek came on Mormon Book Reviews first and broke the biggest story, one of the biggest stories in the history of Mormonism. Now we're going to get to that because we want to kind of talk about the history of this channel. But really, we can't bury the lead at the same time. So yeah, basically Mormon Book Reviews, if in one sense, I've just based over the course of the last conversations with my connections in all the different groups, over the course of the last 72 hours, they weren't intending on releasing those press release, the joint press release between the Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That was not intended to be released on Tuesday. But because they heard rumblings that John and I were talking, and that John and I were posting on social media that this big story is about to break, you better have your notifications turned on the MBR, because it's happening, folks. And we posted the interview at 3:15 Eastern Time, 1:15 Mountain Time. And within, I don't know, it was probably within minutes, maybe I've heard some people say 10, 15, 20, whatever, but within minutes of us posting this story, the press release was submitted. That was never the intention to release that story. So we got out ahead of that. But I think, and I want to give more details about that, Gene, but I think you also kind of wanted to just talk about the history of this channel.
Yeah, and so I was super excited to see you talking with John. He's wandering around with the Community of Christ. What do they call that building? The convention center?
The auditorium and the temple. So he had the temple in the background, the auditorium, but he was standing in the temple lot where when Jesus returns, that will be his abode in that temple.
That's right. And so it was really awesome to see you breaking that news. And in my opinion, I'm not exactly sure. I don't have the total beat of all the Mormon world, but it seems like the Brighamites, or the Latter-day Saints with a small d, maybe aren't aware of how big a story it is. You know what I mean? It seems like more of the other channels are talking about it, like how big a news story it really is. And so, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about, what your modest channel started, 2 years and 2 months ago or something like that?
Just under 3 years.
Just under 3 years ago now.
Yeah, it's hard to believe now. Yeah, March 29th.
You started being, what do you call, not yellow journalism, because that's where they break news just to get people to read stuff. But, who Walter Cronkite was the big guy when I was little. Who was the big guy when you were little?
I think like Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings and Dan Rather. Those are the big three. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Rather. That's right. And so you're able to bring some stuff. But over the last couple of years, you brought a number of stories out. I remember, I think was the first one, the picture of Joseph Smith, the dead Garrett.
Yeah, and I'll get into that. And here's our homie guy. There's our guy, Joseph. Man, this is my guy. He's my homie. We would have been wrestling each other back in the day, guaranteed. We probably would have excommunicated each other from our respective churches. But that's just
right. And then welcome back.
The next day, I would then be giving a sermon with Brother Joseph sitting in the front pew. That's the kind of relationship I would have had with the prophet. Now, before we get there to the photograph, because actually I want to give you a tidbit, a little story that most people aren't aware of. But this is what was so cool. So my channel had less than 100 subscribers, and I had Mark Staker, who works at the Church Historians Department, and a well-regarded, highly regarded historian. And we talked about Tunbridge Farm, which was the farm that Joseph Smith Sr. farmed before Joseph Smith was even born.
Right, in Vermont.
What's that?
In Vermont.
In Vermont, yep, exactly. And so he goes to me and says, Steve, you know, we actually we did some archaeological work there, and we actually recovered some spores of what they were growing at the time. We had theories about what the Smith family was growing at the farm, but we didn't know for sure. So we collected these spores that date to the time period of Joseph Smith Sr.'s overseeing of this farmland. And he says, in a month or two, they're going to be run through a spectrometer, and we're going to be able to determine the results of what the Smith family was growing while they were farming the land. I'm like, wow. And he says, and I'll come back on your show to break the story. So I was literally for 2 months was badgering Mark. He's like, I know. He was giving me updates, and he's got a great sense of humor. And he says, yeah, still waiting on the results, still working on it. I thought we were going to have them this week. So during the summer of 2021, over the course of about 3 months, Mark and I were having this conversation. And then finally, it's a Wednesday, and he says, okay, Steve, I got the results. So I tape them, and I say, breaking news. We're going to find out what they were growing at Tunbridge Farm. Again, I had maybe 120 subscribers, maybe 150.
So that was the germ of you breaking news.
Germ, I like that. So we disclosed what they were growing at Tunbridge Farm was hops to make beer.
There you go.
So now we know for sure. We now know what they were growing. One of the crops that they were growing included hops. So interesting story. But you know, I want to tie this in because it ties in so beautifully. So I tape it that Wednesday, as I recall, and later that night I release it. I get a message from John Hajicek. And he goes to me, he says, you know what, Steve? He said, that was a really good episode. And I'll tell you, he really respects Mark immensely. And I think that John Hajicek, he recognized in me and my pursuits of history and the importance of something so insignificant as the pollen spores, right, that were recovered at Tunbridge Farm. See, this is how deep in the weeds, or how we get into the dirt and get our fingers dirty to really get to the story. And it doesn't matter if it's about pollen spores, or it doesn't matter that we showed on Mormon book reviews that it wasn't a swamp that they came to in Nauvoo, but it was actually not a swamp. That was part of folklore. See, this is the thing. We are using the best scholars, and they're coming on our program, and they are telling us the latest cutting edge research that's going on. So the first time it was ever announced to the world, it wasn't in the Deseret News. It wasn't the church newsroom. It was on Mormon book reviews, I believe in August of 2021, that we broke that story. So this is actually something that was from the very beginning of Mormon book reviews, is that, and then I think scholars and even somebody like John Hajicek, he was very impressed with that interview. And so I think that kind of laid the groundwork for my relationship, and who I'd met John just a couple months before for the first time at the Mormon History Association. And we immediately hit it off because we recognized that we were kindred spirits that way. So that kind of, even just that little story just comes full circle, how it ties into breaking, I think, the biggest news story, one of the biggest news stories in the history of Mormonism.
So you then met him at your first Mormon History Association meeting?
June 2021. I think it was the Saturday. I had met Richard Bushman that Thursday for the first time, and then booked him for my program, which was a coup. And then for the last 3 years, I've been trying to get John Hajicek on my program. And finally, he called me with about 10 minutes heads up. You know, let's do this. Let's break this story together, Steve, which was so awesome. See, that's what cultivating these relationships with all these different groups is so important, to be able to do that. And that, and the payoff, if you will, is something that happened Tuesday. That, you know, and that was really amazing to think that here I'm some guy that lives in a 50-year-old mobile home in Florida, basically scooped everybody.
And I think what's special about you, Steve, is that you honor everyone's history. This is history. This is sacred to people. This is where they come from, what their whole foundational beliefs are, you know, based on. And you equally honor everyone's space in the Mormon spectrum, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I just want to continue this journey of these stories. So now I'm sure I'm missing, I'm actually probably go look through my history, because I've put out almost 500 videos now. I'm sure they'll be like, oh, that's right, I forgot about that story I broke. So I'm only going to give you just an overview, because these
and we'll we'll link all the ones that you feel
Yep.
should be in
Okay.
the show description.
I'll try to get those to you today. If not, we'll get it into the description eventually. Because
sure, I can add them. I can add them.
So I wanted to talk about the next. This was a big event, and this again ties into doing the hard work. See, this is the thing. When I was on Mormon Stories in April of 2022, I was like, and of course that put me on a lot of people's maps. And the reason why I just reference that is because I remember the next month, it's Memorial Day. It's a Monday night, 9:00 Eastern time. And John DeLynn is doing a live stream on his channel. And I was like, okay, if I want to be counted amongst the best, I got to work that hard. I got to be able to do a Memorial Day live stream if I need to, right? So I recognize the work ethic of somebody like John DeLynn and people like Rick Bennett. He works his tail off, and Bill Reel, and of course just the great mind that is Radio Free Mormon, and all these. I mean, I could list out, but there's just one of the things that I think differentiates a lot of podcasters from just about everybody else is the willingness to do the research, do the homework. I did the 10,000 hours of research of Mormonism before I even started my channel, and so that all pays off when you're doing this. And so this is another story I want to share. So it was a Thursday when this story broke, when this was released to the world, this photograph. Okay, the daguerreotype of Joseph Smith. It was a Thursday. And I remember I had scheduled a Friday morning guest that I was going to post on Friday night. Well, I get a message from him. And he says, my nanny is not going to be able to work tomorrow. We're going to have to reschedule the interview. So I'm scaring because I don't have a Friday night episode lined up. What am I going to do? Well, it was really interesting. Reed Russell just made a comment earlier that day. He said, you know what? You ought to book Lachlan to come in your program to talk about the Joseph Smith photo. I thought, oh, yeah, that would be kind of cool. But it wasn't until that author canceled. It was Norman Van Sciver who wrote the graphic novel of Joseph Smith. If I had already in my mind mentally already had prepared myself to release the interview Friday night, I would have not even think about it. And then I thought, wait. So I am hanging out with some friends on a Thursday night at 9:00, and then it dawned on me, well, I have had John Hamer on. He was one of my early guests. He was on shortly after Richard Bushman, June of 2021 on my channel. So you understand, like early on, I mean, I was booking people before I booked Richard Bushman that were big in and of themselves. Even at this time, Don Bradley I already lined up.
That's right. So, and I'll say really quickly is that I had already mentioned to you that I paid attention to you early on. I think I was like your 178th subscriber because you got Richard Bushman. Nobody else in the space that I was listening to was getting Richard Bushman.
Yep.
And the other thing is when I would hear John Hamer talk, I told him, every time I hear you talk, I feel so much smarter.
John Hamer is really, and again, I want to talk about John Hamer later in this conversation too, because I think it's really important we honor him as we honor ultimately, I think, the community of Christ in many ways. So I reach out to John Hamer and I'm like, John, is there any way you could get Lachlan MacKay to come on my program to talk about the Joseph Smith photo? This is Thursday, the day the story's breaking. This is on Drudge Report. This is being reported by the New York Times. And John Hamer says, you know what, Steve? He says, your platform would be the perfect platform to release this story. Now, 10 years ago, the perfect platform probably would have been Mormon Stories, right? But the whole dynamic of that podcast world had changed to the point that really the only podcast that existed that was universally accepted by all the different groups. In other words, if this were to go on Mormon Stories at that time, this would be an anti-Mormon photo, right? That's how it would have been perceived by TBMs. So this was the only neutral place that John Hamer even realized. So he says, I'm going to lobby Lachlan. Again, who is Lachlan MacKay? Lachlan MacKay is an apostle, a direct descendant of Joseph Smith, and co-wrote the paper identifying this photograph for the Whitmer Journal, okay? And Hamer says, I'm going to lobby on your behalf. Okay, and then I said, John, why don't you be like my co-host? He's like, great. So then the next morning, it's about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. I get a message from John Hamer, and he says, Steve, he says, you know what? Both Lachlan and I are slammed right now because this photograph doesn't look like it's going to happen tonight. Maybe another day. I'm like, okay, totally get it. Understood. So then it's like, I'm thinking, well, I'll think of something, like, because again, I fly by the seat of my pants in this operation. So I remember I'm on the phone with Josh Gailey, again, Bicker tonight, talking to him about the photograph. And this is about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay. So a few hours have passed by when I heard from John that's not going to happen. And I'm talking to Josh, and we're talking about the photograph, of course, and he's asking me about it, and like, yeah, it's really interesting, blah, blah, blah. And then I hear my phone ding, and I don't think anything of it. And about 10 minutes into the conversation with Josh Gailey, I thought, you know what? I need to check this message. It was a message from John Hamer on Messenger saying, Steve, we're on. Locke's agreed to come on. I'm like, whoa.
The spirit told you that was an important ding.
That's right. Exactly. It's like, I got it. It's like, yeah, I better get off. It was like 10 minutes later. I thought, you know what? That phone ding, I got to check this. I didn't know it was John. So he says, okay, so he'll be ready to talk this evening. Well, now what's evening? Well, I'm thinking, okay, he's in Nauvoo, Illinois. That's Central Time Zone. So this could be 5, 6, 7 o'clock my time, somewhere in that range, and still don't have a time. And so at 7:15, I have my producer skiering, making the thumbnails, right? And we're just learning how to do thumbnails at this time too, And I'm like, at 7:15, I go and hop on my channel. I know at 6:30 I taped something and I posted at 7:15 on my channel announcing, stay tuned, everybody. I'm about to interview a major guest about the Joseph Smith photo. That's all I said, like just a 5-minute thing. And then boom, that video just takes off right away. And so, but I still haven't scheduled. I still don't have the interview scheduled yet. I'm promising I'm going to deliver that night. Okay.
Going on faith alone.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And so then it's 8:20, and I'm thinking, that's 7:20 Central Time. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Well, I'm taking it on faith that John Hamer is going to, make this happen. So I get a message from John Hamer at 8:20. He says, Steve, he'll be ready to hop on at 8:30. Boom. I hop on Zoom. I send out the links to Locke and John Hamer. By 8:40, 8:45, we're taping. And what's so funny is that one of the first rules of podcasting I learned from a very famous rock and roll podcaster. He said, always make sure that everything's plugged in. You don't have anything wireless. And as I'm 5 minutes into the interview, I realized that I don't have my computer plugged into my router. And I'm like, and then I thought, but you know what? I don't know if this is spirit or not, but I heard a voice or something say, don't worry about it. It's going to go without a hitch. Like I knew this was like too special, that we weren't going to have technical difficulties, right? So we do the interview. It's mind-blowing to think that this story that's like nobody knows, and this is the other thing, no other podcasters are jumping on this story. Why? See, the difference between that story and the story that broke on Tuesday is that there wasn't a press release from the church saying that this is Joseph Smith's photograph. So all the other podcasters, including Midnight Mormons and all these other people, they had to wait, right? They couldn't post anything yet because they had to hear from the church in many ways, right? Now, I'm not mocking. I'm just knowing how the faithful space operates.
They were waiting for a trusted source, and now you are the trusted source.
Yeah. So nobody was touching this story. And I'm like, this is huge. I mean, how in the world? We got a picture of Joseph Smith and nobody's saying anything? So look, this is the key thing, folks. At that time, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I had over 1,000 subscribers. I don't think I had 2,000 subscribers at the channel yet. So we taped the interview, and then I get the thumbnail from Anthony, my producer, have it ready to go, and it takes time to process, takes time to load, and by I think 10:15 that night Eastern time, which had been 8:15 Mountain time, I posted that video on YouTube. And I would say that weekend, it was probably one of the most viewed YouTube videos in the Mormon podcast space that weekend. And it was the first time that I ever did anything that went viral, that got really big and exploded. And it was the only place people could go to find out about the Joseph Smith photo, because everybody else was radio silence. They're all waiting to take their lead from the church. And so That became the big thing that put me on the map in a lot of people's eyes. And so that was just another, I mean, and again, look, John Hamer, Lachlan, MacKay, John Hajicek, all these names are part of the story from the very beginning, right? And so then okay, so let me just give another, okay, so then fall of 2022, everybody's doing their thing. And with the help of Rebecca Biblioteca, we catch wind that the CBC, their version of the CBC, called the Fifth Estate, was going to have a whistleblower on about the church finances.
So the Canadians' version of like 60 Minutes or something like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big look. I could do a YouTube channel on Canadian politics. I mean, just so you know, like I'm plugged into so many different ways. I could do YouTube channels on about 5 or 6 different subjects that nobody knows anything about, and could do MBR versions in those spaces as well. So I recognize, oh, this is the Fifth Estate. This is a big deal. So then Rebecca gets on the horn. We're able to get Nigel to come on my program. And so this is what we did. Literally, Thursday night, the Fifth Estate drops the story. And I remember even going on Twitter asking, hey, will this be live on YouTube? And the Fifth Estate got back to me and said, yes, it will be on YouTube, 9:00 Eastern time live. So I watched the thing. Now, just keep in mind, on Thursday, we book Nigel. We track him down. Nobody knows who this guy is. Nobody even knows his name.
Nigel Bristow.
Yeah. Nobody knows who this guy is. So we track him down. And again, Rebecca did a great job. That was kind of gives you a little insight of the Rebecca Biblioteca that we would all come to get to know, right? And so we taped Friday morning with Nigel, the day after it aired on the CBC. And on Friday night, Nigel's on my program. Just so you know, MBR was ahead of everybody else when it came to the church finances story. It took months for everybody else to catch up. And you know what? By then, guess what? I wasn't doing church finances anymore. Why? Because I was working on the next story. You see? And so, and again, I'm not trying to brag here. I'm just telling you how organically how this all happened, in its own very crazy way. And so let me think here if there's any other, I mean, again, there's okay, just this year alone, I see this really interesting press release go on Reddit. Latter-day Saint Church to share space with a historic congregation in Manhattan, New York. Oh, that's interesting. I rarely ever hear that story before. That's quite unusual because the church, and it turns out what happened is that they're going to start remodeling this month the temple in Manhattan, which also includes wards that operate, 2 or 3 wards that operate in that facility. So it is the temple's space that is shared, that also wards share their services there, and they're going to be remodeling all of those. So they went around looking for a place that they could rent for the next 3 or 4 years while the remodeling is going on. Well, everybody just looks at this on Reddit. Oh, it's interesting. When I go and I'm like, you know what? I got to check out this church. And say again, because I bring to the table a lot of knowledge through all my years of studying religion, recognize, one, this is historically one of the most important Protestant congregations in the history in American history. You can't write the story of American Christianity without including this historic congregation. So one, that's interesting. My Protestant world coming in, right? But then I look at the pastor, and the pastor is an openly queer man with his rainbow vestments on. I thought, ooh, isn't this fascinating? So we get in touch with the pastor, and he's like, yeah, we put it out there. We're not taking down any of our pride flags from our buildings or in our hallways, and that we're going to be sharing a sacred space with Latter-day Saints. And I will be a pastor with my painted nails, giving fist pumps to Latter-day Saint kids. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, this is a big story. And I still feel it's an undertold story because it's the same week that the church announced their PR guy, who has a history of saying, posting pro LGBTQ things on. This is the same week that the church closes with this. And I tell people, I'm sorry, this doesn't happen in Rexburg, Idaho, right? This is the church putting out feelers about how they're going to address the LGBTQ issues. And I think even the idea of having a church services, ward services happening in a building that has pride flags hanging from the outside was another feeler that the church was putting out. So to me, that was a significant thing. And then I think when you stop and think about even like my conversations that I've had with Greg Mattson and Jacob Hansen and Jim Bennett. You know, one of the sad things is I don't really quite understand. A lot of people did all these nominations for podcasts, and I don't understand why they ignore my program. Because I'm sorry, but one of the most explosive podcasts last year was the Jim Bennett, Jacob Hansen conversation. How that is not recognized, I don't know. I don't understand why my collaboration with Bill Reel on Mormon Discussions about the whole Neville Land, Peter Pan, Dan Peterson story, why wasn't that nominated? That's what I don't get. I don't really get. I feel like because all these groups are tied in, well, this is faithful, this is anti, they ignore the work that we're doing. So I just want to tell people out there, I don't know why, I don't know how you guys could have all these nominations and podcast things, and you're not including Mormon book reviews. I want to point out a blind spot that everybody has. How is this possible? Okay,
you're basically saying you don't have to have been previously endowed in order to be a Mormon podcaster.
That's right. And I think that I feel like I've been given I've been shorted here. I feel like I think that people, because they can't put me in a box. The people who give out awards to the ex-Mormon podcasts and the people that give awards to the TBM podcast, they don't know what to do with me. But look, I just want to put that out there. Like, okay, that we've done so much work here at MBR with in our team of people. We, and this is a small team, but there's the partners and the relationships we build. I really feel like I need a little more love. That's all. That's what I'm saying. I don't really need your awards. I really could care less in many ways. Not important. Actually, one of the biggest awards though that I got was I was nominated to serve on the board of one of the most prominent Mormon scholarly organizations there is, period. One of the oldest, most prominent ones. I'm not going to give the name. I was nominated amongst other candidates, so it wasn't guaranteed, but I politely declined because I said, look, I don't want to be a name. I want to be, if I'm going to be part of this, the board of directors of this prestigious organization, I want to give 110%. And I can't do that. So just again, that to me is a bigger reward than anything from these podcast communities. And also the greatest affirmation I think I ever got was when Richard Bushman went on my program and said, boy, I wish I had consulted you for my book. I'll take that. I don't need the certificates. I don't need the awards. That's fine. I'll take what Dan Vogel has to say about me and Thomas Murphy and Richard Bushman, the acknowledgement of the important role this podcast has played. I'll just leave it at that. So I'm ranting a little bit here. So I wasn't planning on even touching this, but I think it's important just to kind of give the context, and then just to give you like another context.
It's almost like a Venn diagram where circles converge.
Yeah.
And people think that you're in the middle where no circle is really converging, even though you're all around everything.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is such a unique space that look, I'm the only buddy basically in this world that's doing this, right? So I recognize the unicornness, if you will, of this endeavor. So, but just to touch a couple bit things too, is on the impact this channel has on Mormon scholarship. So I have Thomas Murphy come on my program to address Rob Beldrum's model that he presented on my channel. And Thomas Murphy comes on with a response, which later becomes a paper that he co-authors with Simon Southerton, and in one of the most prestigious anthropological journals there are, and acknowledges Mormon book reviews as being one of the catalysts for this paper. I have books on this shelf that I'm cited in now. Well, one book that I'm cited in. Okay. So this is the thing, like the impact, not only the impact that we're having on the podcast world. I mean, think how different the podcast world if MBR doesn't exist, right? I mean, again, I'm not trying to brag. I'm just thinking like, it's just, I'm talking through this, Gene, because I've been going through a lot over the last 72 hours. I've been crying. I've broken down and cried a few times. I want to share that with my audience too. And we're going to get to that. And we'll go full circle and talk about. But before
we start crying, I'll say one thing. Even if you never become, let's say, a poster child for Mormon history, at least you'll be a footnote here and there.
That's right. And hey, look, this, you know why? Because I read the footnotes too, buddy. And
the people staying after a movie and watching all the credits.
Yep. The people that read the footnotes are the people that respect what we're doing here. Okay. So there's just so many layers of this story that I think is really important. And then just, I mean, I could go on and on and on. I don't want to do that because I don't want to brag, but I want to just kind of lay the groundwork of what it takes to do the hard work, establish the friendships and the rapport, putting your ego to the side. There's too many podcasters that have this ego. Well, I don't like that person. I don't care if you don't like that person. They're an important person. You better find a way to get, and look, I have people in my program I don't like. Get your ego out of the way, you know, and just even people you can't stand talking to. You know what? Don't let your personal stuff get in the way either. Okay, put that to the side. Be objective. Okay, so being objective and honest with your audience. That's why when I found one of those podcasters lying to his audience, you know, vis-a-vis my little story we did with Bill. So you broke a cardinal rule there. You lied to your audience, and you allowed for that same lie to proceed out of my lips on my podcast.
So it had to be corrected.
And so that's what put me on this thing. Like, okay, you lied, and you told a lie to your audience, a cardinal sin. You made up somebody. And then this made up person makes its way into journals. I mean, come on. That's how I still don't understand how people could put out all these awards for podcasts and don't even acknowledge the important work that Bill Reel and I did. That was a big story. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox on this one.
So, I can testify that Steve Pynakker exists. I've met him at Mormon History Association in Sunstone, and he's not AI.
Thank you. I got censored by Google AI last. I'll come back on the show to talk about that. We'll talk because that's another story that I'm actually. This week, the crusade that I was going to go on this week was Google. They're censoring us before, and not a single human has even watched the episode. AI is judge, jury, and executioner of humanity and its voices. Okay, so it's really important we talk, and I'm going to go. That's going to be next week's crusade, by the way. Okay, so basically, long story short, it all comes full circle. Is Tuesday I get the call from John. 15 minutes later, we're tape a 15-minute interview, and by 3:15, the biggest story of the year, of the century, whatever you want to say, of all time, is broken on Mormon book reviews by two outsiders, John Hajicek, who's a Strangite, but no, the full name of his church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with a capital D and no hyphen.
Capital D. That's right.
Let's honor the name. All right, and honor the man, John Hajicek. Maybe I should do a rendering of praise to the man, but not for John. I'm just joking. So John and I've had this relationship, this friendship that goes back years now, from the very first time that I met him that Saturday in June of 2021 to then that fall, I go to Independence, Missouri to speak at Patrick MacKay's Book of Mormon rally, and him that day buying lunch. He always insists on paying for my meals, having lunch, breaking bread with his daughter, and at the time her boyfriend, and me and John just talking for hours. And I remember John looks at me and he said, Steve, he says, you and I, we're the same person. We're both outsiders. And we come through, we look at things from a very different lens. We're the same person. And in many ways, that's where the kinship, we both recognize the kinship in each other. That's very unique. And so that was just kind of the building, the building of this foundation, of trust with somebody like John, who in many ways feels that he's been wrongly accused of things. He's been accused, that he feels like he's been shut out by a lot of people. And I really think that's part of the reason why he came on my program, because he wanted to, he just felt like, he went on other podcasts that day afterwards, but the difference between my podcast and those podcasts that they went on was that my podcast is watched at the Maxwell Institute. It's watched by the BYU professors. I mean, I'm freaking talking to Brian Hales on this phone the other day, and that's how he heard about the story. So you got all the top scholars, all the people at BYU, everybody's watching my channel because it has credibility.
That's right. Your podcast might not be the biggest podcast, but it has the biggest tent. Yes,
the biggest tent, and I also think probably the quality of the level of people with PhD level people who are in the know, the top scholars of Mormonism know that I know what I'm talking about, and they don't think of me as an amateur. They wouldn't have nominated me for that board if they thought I was, you know, an amateur in that sense. They know that I have, bring to the table some knowledge on this. And again, I don't want to say I know everything and I know I'm smart and everything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying
history, street cred.
Yeah, I've got street cred in the scholarly community. And by the way, I will be giving a presentation at the Mormon History Association this June. Last September, I gave a presentation at the John Whitmer Historical Association. And in both times was invited to come. I didn't have to submit a proposal. They came to me. Just so you know, I just want people to understand how this works. Well, Matt Harris was the one that came up with the idea of the presentation that David Boyce and Rick Bennett and I did at Whitmer. So I want to give credit to Matt Harris in that regard. And Christine Blythe for the Mormon History Association approached me about doing something for MHA. So I want to just honor those people and thank them for the opportunity that has been given to most people. I mean, that's an honor just to be able to present at these prestigious venues. It is an honor. Okay, so this much I do know, homie, is the church was not planning on, and from my understanding, this is again speculation from people that are in the know, but I'm just saying this is speculation. This isn't gospel truth, but I think the intention was that this was going to be announced at General Conference by President Nelson. The purchase of the Kirtland Temple. That was the ideal scenario that they wanted to set up. But they also think that the reason why that press release was put out when it was, because I think they knew that John Hajicek was sniffing around. And I think they realized, look, if we got to be ready to get this out, because we don't want John to be out in front of this story in many ways. I think that was kind of the thought process. Well, and it's not just John. I'm not saying it's just John. I think if anybody was doing this, they'd want to get out in front of it. So let's be very clear here too. But John has a history here too that would give them maybe more incentive to make sure to get it out too, is in a timely manner. And so, and just so you know, folks, it is. Look, I've been talking to my my connections in the community of Christ for the last 72 hours and received confirmation on a lot of these things. Look, and the reason why I can say this with a degree of certainty is that people, again, another major story that Mormon Book Reviews broke earlier this year was that the community of Christ was going to be naming a new prophet. And I went on my channel the day before saying tomorrow, it looks like tomorrow, the community of Christ will be naming its new prophet. So I had sources of sources in the community of Christ that were able to get out to me this information. Those same sources of sources were blindsided because there's a certain protocol that the community of Christ would have followed, which is they would have put people in the know ahead of time that this was going to go down. Well, I will tell you, I spoke to one person who found out about it, got a phone call from one of the apostles. I'm not going to give the name, but got a phone call from one of the apostles telling them this because this directly affected their livelihood in the church. We're talking minutes before the story breaks that they're desperately going around calling the people that they would have definitely had given the heads up 2 days, if not weeks before, right? So we know that this was all done very quickly and very last minute. And this is the thing that really I want to maybe close up on here, Gene, is that yesterday afternoon, I hop on Facebook Live and I start talking about the story, just kind of a stream of consciousness thing, which I tend to do when I do live stuff. And towards the end, I started breaking down and crying because I have felt so much pain from the community of Christ folk. Now, one of the proudest things I think I ever did was that day that the story breaks. I'm talking to Greg Manson. I said, Greg, do you want to have me on the program? Because I kind of helped break this story. And said, okay, I'll send you a link in 10 minutes. Let's do this. So I taped with Greg Manson of the Quick Show, which I think has got like 50,000 views on his channel right now. And I'm kind of explaining the story to his audience, to a very conservative TBN audience, right? And I'm like, I just think it's really important that we honor the community of Christ and that you don't spike the football so too hard, that your cousins, the Midwestern saints are grieving now. The Prairie saints are grieving. The mountain saints need to honor them. And I will say that reading those comments, the comments afterwards in that video, it was so heartening to see Latter-day Saints say, you know what, we love the community of Christ. We appreciate the work. And I'm so glad and honored that I was able to put that in the bloodstream, because trust me, I'm talking to people one of my connections in Provo, Christian, says, yeah, they're spiking the football here in Provo, Steve.
That's right. Deepest respects to the community of Christ for their stewardship over the last 100+ years.
Absolutely. We need to honor them.
In these holy grounds, these sacred grounds, preserved and available to the public for viewing.
Yep. And I think that's it. Yeah, we want to honor the work that they've done. And I want to honor Lachlan MacKay. I know this must have been really hard for you, Lach. I want to honor Barbara Walden, who's in charge of the historic sites, was for the church. I want to honor Paul DeBarth, who spent decades of his life excavating. His fingerprints are all over all those buildings that were once in the possession of the community of Christ. I grieve with you. I cry with you, and I have over the phone with you. And so I think it's really important that we realize this is a hurt, devastated people. And they are. And I'm also hearing from all my connections that it's the people that feel that betrayed the most are the ex-Mormons that joined the community of Christ. I'm getting messages from people saying, I'm resigning. I even had a guy quote on my, and again, I don't get political here, but I just want to say this is the rawness of this person was at. He says, I think he was a Latter-day Saint, but he was LGBTQ. And he said, I had a safe space that I was accepted into as a queer man. And now my sacred spaces are no longer safe to me because of how he views how the, LDS church views him. So he feels betrayed and he's leaving the church. Okay. So this is where it gets real. And so I think it's really important that we love the community of Christ people, honor their tradition, their stewardship, their custodial role that they played in maintaining these important historic sites. There was genuine fear in John Hajicek's voice when he was talking live with me, because the press release hadn't come out yet, that they were going to close the temple and they were going to do, and then it would be closed to the public and they would only open it for temple people that have temple recommends. Well, there were assurances apparently that it's not going to happen, that it will remain a historic site and it will be free to the public. So that's there. So that was a relief for John, because look what they did to the Salt Lake Temple. They gutted it. And they ran many of the objects inside that building, these important objects, in many ways sacred, through the wood chipper. Right? So there was also a concern about that happening to the Kirtland Temple. So I think it's really important that all these people, Latter-day Saints, you understand this is the emotional, this is what the people are worried about. And including Utah Saints are concerned about these things too, right? They're upset about what happened to Salt Lake Temple. Many people are very upset that the Provo Temple is being torn down, which is an architectural wonder. It's a fascinating design. It's an important thing. And then people are sad to see this important, very important temple that many, many people went through. And it has a very important role in whether they got married or whether they were students at BYU or you went through it when you were at the MTC. That building is going to be razed, and they're going to put another one up. So that was the concerns going into this whole thing, right? And so that's kind of where I want to leave it at, Gene. And I want to thank you for giving me your platform just to kind of discuss this out. And again, it's been hard for me. I was crying. And it hit me right then. And then last night, I broke down and cried like 3 or 4 times, if not more, last night.
I saw John Hamer's profile picture that day, and it's very sad looking. And I reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to, talk about some of the side issues. And he said, he just wouldn't be able to do any interviews. It's just too hard for him.
Yeah, and he got right back to me when I messaged him, and he told me the same, which I totally understand. I do want to say that I did get a text message from, I don't think this will be any betrayal. Well, no, I won't give the name. Let's just say the biggest podcaster there is had a conversation with John Hamer on the phone today. And so he's reaching out and he is talking to people. So John, I love you, man. John Hamer, you're an awesome human being. We've taped about 4 or 5 things together. I remember even Barbara, when I did the 3-parter about the history of the church from 1820 to 1860, Barbara Jones Brown went to me at the MHA and she said, I watched your series with John Hamer, and boy, I sure learned a lot of history in that episode. So that was one of my proudest series of interviews. Again, this was years ago now. It's funny to say, but this would have been like 2 years ago that we were doing this important work. And I don't know where John goes, to be honest with you. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Tough space.
What's that?
He's in a tough spot right now.
So keep John Hamer and the entire Community of Christ community in your prayers, folks. Or at least if you don't believe in a higher power, just maybe send good positive vibes their way, however you want it to manifest. It's really important that we and then reach out. If you haven't reached out to people, like if you're friends with John Hamer, if you're friends with somebody in Community of Christ, reach out and tell them, hey, I know I'm feeling it for you. Do appreciate your church. And then the positive thing is, one, the Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints did sit down and have good faith conversations, which that's important. I think it's important that they kind of maybe bridge some of the gaps that have existed between those churches. So that's a positive take, right? I also think it's positive that the Community of Christ now is set on solid financial footing that will enable it to, I don't know if this is a reboot. I think it's a bit of a reboot to decide to build a different foundation that they're going to be working on and then go in a different direction. I think it's entirely plausible that they just completely remove any vestiges of the restoration from their church and just go, like, they've basically become full-line mainline Protestant. Is the Book of Mormon next? Is that on the chopping block as being still part of their canon? I mean, it's safe to say that that's certainly legitimate speculation. And then let's just talk about the end of days real quick. In this context, of course, it is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's not lost on a lot of people that the potential significance of this as possibly being a preview of the coming forth, the return of the Savior. And really, that it really begs the question, it was unthinkable that the Kirtland Temple would be sold. But now let's start thinking about another important spot.
Temple lot.
And that's the Temple lot. Is that next? I will have you know that the Temple lot has had some issues over the last few years because let me put it this way. If Mauricio's, well, this is what I've been told. Okay, so Mauricio's plates in Brazil, there were a lot of people in the Independence area that jumped on that. And then when they found that there was a Mark Hoffman forgery, that kind of died down. But there was looked like for a period of time there that Mauricio was going to go in and take over the Temple lot. That he was getting enough people in that area and that movement that he may have been able to take over the Temple lot church. That's an undertold story, but I do have that on good sources that could have happened. So if that Mark Hoffman forgery wasn't found in Mauricio's plates, that church might have changed hands. So I do know that it has devastated a lot of the communities in the Independence area, that whole thing. And so it does make you wonder if that maybe being at a weak point, the church come in and just look, you have a church that has a couple thousand members and you offer them a ridiculous amount of money and basically all the church members become millionaires. I mean, I don't know if the Temple lot will actually do that, but I'm saying if there's any time that it's certainly a plausible scenario that could happen in the next year or two, it certainly could happen soon. I'm not saying I have any knowledge on the subject, but I'm just telling you based on my being able to piece things together. I don't think it's a far-fetched to think that the Temple lot might be on their radar.
That's right. The Temple lot purchase in the future might be a long way away or a short way away.
Well, and one last thing about the end of days. Because
right.
again, I think it's really important to acknowledge this is part of this conversation. We can't just go all scholarly. One of the reasons there was a gentleman that was scheduled during the solar eclipse, a person who's, if you will, they wouldn't say they're a schism, but a person that is viewed as a schismatic who left the Brighamite Church, was scheduled to give a speech on April 6th through the 8th in Kirtland, had the Kirtland Temple lined up months ago. As a matter of fact, this person I had lunch with told me that last year that he had lined it up. And so got a commitment from the Community of Christ that they're able to use the facilities so that he could give a major, important prophetic speech. And I was told by this person this would be the most important talk he'll ever give. That has to do with the end of days. Well, a few months ago, they canceled it. And they was told that they had staffing issues. Now it looks to me, and so somebody brought this up to me. So this person then rescheduled to do the speech in Palmyra because both of them are going to be in the path of the solar total eclipse. So this person then announced a few months ago that he's going to Palmyra. Well, I reached out to this person the day of the story breaking that night. And somebody brought this up to me, messaged me. Is it possible that you were canceled by request of the LDS Church? And this person went to me and said, that's what my sources are telling me. So that's a lot of information there for you, Gene. I'm looking forward to you releasing this episode. I did want to preview one thing. I am going to probably be going live. What is today's date? Today is Friday, March 8th. It's 10 minutes to 4 my time, and probably about 8 o'clock-ish Eastern time, I'm going to be doing a live feed. So if you want to get this out before that, Gene, you could be the one to kind of break this story, and I want to show everybody. I'm going to exclusively here on Later Daily Digest. So Gene gives you incentive. Got to get this thing up and ready. This is the thumbnail. Breaking the news and 1 million views.
There you go.
We are about to hit the 1 million views.
That's for my channel?
Yeah. And so that's it, folks. We're very excited that we're about ready to cross the 1 million views threshold. And that's an important milestone for this channel. And you know what I like about it is I did that. We did this without a single video getting over 100,000 views. The most viewed video I have on my channel is like around 40,000. So that means I didn't have one video that went viral with 850,000 views or some short get 500,000 views. It was through long form, hard work, plodding through, working your tail off, not the empty calories of shorts, or something just getting viral like in getting lucky. This 1 million views was accomplished through hard work over the course of these 2.5 years or so, and we're also closing in on our 500th video. So I want to thank everybody. I love all of you. You're all awesome human beings. Gene, I think you're a great guy, and we'll talk again soon. But thanks for having me on the show, sir.
That's right. Everyone like and subscribe, and I will try to get this uploaded so that it reaches HD quality in time to put it out in a few hours. So it'll be a lead in. They can go right over to your show.
Yep.
Right after watching this.
Okay, and so stay tuned, folks. 8 p.m.
I am totally honored to be able to be what I consider. I feel that you're my friend. I hope you feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been an amazing journey. The last couple of years has been pretty awesome. And you got me into the podcasting world reluctantly, kicking and screaming. And so I thank you for that. And like I say, in the description, we'll try to have as many of Steve's breaking stories listed, and also other important videos. And like when Steve first interviewed me, probably.
Yeah. Just so you know, folks, if he doesn't have them in the description when this video comes out, because I'm a very busy guy, I'll make sure
we can add them as they go.
Add them in as we go, and we'll go from there. So okay, well, homie, good to have.
That's right. Like I'll probably get like 25 views when I first release it, and then 2,500 over the next 2 weeks after that. So
okay, so another thing we buried the lead though, of course, too, was one of the most important ongoing news stories that Gene and I collaborate on every year. Is we give you the inside story and what happened at Sunstone right afterwards. So look forward to our probably sometime in August of this year. We will give another Sunstone report. So important information that we get out there too. We can't.
That's right.
Ignore
that will come out either in August, late August, or September, somewhere around there.
So all right, folks. Thanks.
That's right. Mark your calendar. Bye-bye, everybody.